So thanks everyone for joining. Want to walk through presentation today. Claire's going to take you guys through, really focused on environmental monitoring. Claire is an expert in the space and in the field. I'm really excited to have her on the call today to share with you guys not only what we do, for my food in terms of environmental monitoring, but really just overall some best practices in developing and implementing really an effective program. So Claire, if you want to, okay. So we'll kick things off here. So our story as iFood, if you guys are joining us for your first webinar, you've heard the gist of this before, but the folks that are on for the first time want to just tell you guys our story. So the story of our company actually begins with our founder and chairman of our board, Diane Wetherington. And her story in food started in the early 2000s. So she was consulting here and there for food companies. And then, as I'm sure most of the folks on this call are aware, right, big E. coli spinach outbreak hits in 2006, really puts food safety on the map, right? So now it's on everybody's radar and folks are realizing, hey, there's probably a better way for us to approach these processes, documentation, and so forth. So Diane starts getting more hands-on, digging in with her clients. A few years after that, FSMA rolls out, and then a couple of years after that, iFood is created and started by Diane. So really our mission as a company is the same as Diane's mission has always been, right? It's to really provide a resource that can be a true value for our clients and really just the industry as a whole, right? I mean, we're all kind of in the same boat in terms of food safety, right? So it's really our mission to provide something that's going to enable our clients and equip them with a better way and a modern way to evolve their food safety programs. So over the course of those almost decade now, we've built really strong ties with the major associations across the industry. Really important for us to keep our ear to the ground, understand what are folks out there clamoring for, what's actually going to provide value and help our clients, not only with their day-to-day, but really to improve and grow and secure their businesses. So if we want to move to the next slide, Claire. So quick overview of our webinars. I know I mentioned I recognize some familiar names on the call, so welcome back, and then some new ones as well. So happy to have you guys join us. So list of a couple of our past, and then obviously the current one we're on now, and a couple future webinars. Right here, I will be sending out registration links and follow-up emails to the future webinars. You'll also have links to recordings of the prior ones. If any of those, if you have trouble finding any of those, my email address is there, jim@ifooddecisionsciences.com. But yeah, I'll pass it to Claire now and let her walk you guys through the presentation.
Great, thanks, Jim, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Of all the Zoom calls you could spend your afternoon on or morning, you're choosing to join us, so we're glad to have you. And as Jim mentioned, I'm a food safety scientist with iFood Decision Sciences, and I really work closely with our customers on Listeria and environmental monitoring programs and our software tool, but have been working with industry for a few years now. And I'm happy to share today some key tools and steps that you can take in reviewing your program. So again, in the time that's allocated for today's short webinar, the focus will really be on kind of stepping back and looking at a couple of simple steps you could take to either design, review, or manage your environmental monitoring program. I'll go a brief introduction into environmental monitoring and pathogens that we're worried about, and then spend most of the time on these kind of 4 phases that I see as ways to improve your existing program or get up to speed. To start with a brief introduction, I'm sure everyone is aware of environmental pathogens that we're concerned about, particularly in ready-to-eat foods. Here we have Listeria monocytogenes and Salmonella species. They are quite different organisms, And we often attribute them to different products and environments. So we should not be analyzing the same sponge and the same site for both of these, but depending on your product and your process, you might be looking for these in your operation. So Listeria monocytogenes causes listeriosis, which is a rare but very severe foodborne illness. You'll see there, rare meaning about only 1,600 cases per year, but out of those, about 20% or 250 illnesses result in death. So it's a very important pathogen that we work to control and prevent contaminating food products. It's known to be what we say ubiquitous in environments. Another way to think about it is it could be anywhere. It's been isolated from rural environments, urban environments, built environments, natural environments. So it could be coming in to your facility from a variety of different mechanisms, thinking about soil, but doesn't mean it's everywhere all the time. But it is something that we have to continuously be monitoring for. And then particularly about Listeria monocytogenes is that it survives in pretty harsh conditions. So typical controls that we think of in food safety, like pH and temperature, salt content, water, Listeria is pretty hardy. And so particularly it thrives in cool and moist temperatures, can grow at refrigeration. And so this is what the types of areas that we think about Listeria being in your facility would be those damp areas in a refrigerated room. If there's any sort of residual product or soil or debris there, Listeria could be hanging out there. And of course, over the years, we have seen it persist in food facilities. Salmonella, on the other hand, is a bit more common of a foodborne illness, and that it's in the top 5 foodborne illnesses in the US, about 1 million cases. But we typically think about it as being self-limiting. So you'll have the typical gastroenteritis symptoms, but after a few days it will pass from your system. And of those 1 million cases, only about 450 result in death. Nevertheless, we like to prevent that from contaminating our food products. Also a bit different from Listeria, the source of this pathogen is most likely feces from an infected animal that's getting deposited somewhere nearby and then being carried into your facility. So you might have a bit more seasonal or regional challenges with Salmonella compared to Listeria. Also a bit different, we typically think of Salmonella surviving well in dry conditions and dry products, which is why I mentioned you probably wouldn't look for these 2 bugs in the same spots in your facilities. Similar to Listeria, we do have data to show that it can persist in your facility for years if not detected or eliminated. And then again, both of these are effectively eliminated in foods by cooking. So we're particularly worried about looking for and controlling these pathogens in facilities where products are exposed to the processing environment after a cook step, or in products that don't undergo cook step and will not be cooked prior to consumption. So ready to eat foods. Listeria and Salmonella contaminated products are often traced back to a contamination source in the processing facility. And so because of that, the industry, we spend a lot of time and resources applying extensive and diverse strategies, kind of shown up here, right, to reduce the risk of foodborne contamination. So focusing on sanitary design, control of standing water, traffic patterns, etc. And so really your environmental monitoring program and environmental sampling, depending on when and how you sample, is really designed to verify that these controls are in place and working. So for example, testing during production will verify that employee traffic and hygiene are working to prevent introduction of contamination during production. But it could also be used to validate that these controls are appropriate for your operation. And so this is where you may have heard before about seek and destroy mentality, about testing your equipment at different points during the cleaning, sanitation, disassembly, and reassembly process to make sure that your master sanitation schedule is adequate, and that you don't have any harborage of contamination in your equipment. Now, an environmental monitoring program is not something that you just set, implement, and forget. Something that we're constantly working on. It's a dynamic program. But I will say that on top of that mindset, I think that there have been, several current events have placed a heightened emphasis in certain sectors of the industry, but of course, we can think about it as industry as a whole, have placed a heightened emphasis on having a more robust environmental monitoring program. So for example, consumers continue to want more convenient products, or maybe are changing consumption habits. So we've designed non-ready-to-eat products that they're handling more like a ready-to-eat product. And so of course those bring changing risks in our product development, but also in how we manage the production environment. So I think that's new for some areas and some products. Along those lines, buyers, they want to protect their brand as much as they're protecting consumers, and we see that they have more requirements or more visibility into environmental monitoring programs lately. Also, of course, FDA showing up at your facilities and building out a database of pathogens in production environments. Yet they haven't really put out a final guidance document yet. So there's still some questions resolving around what are their recommended best practices. However, I do think industry groups and the close-knit food safety community has really done a good job at sharing practices and ideas, and there are good industry guidance documents out there. However, you still have to take all that information and build your program. And so some common challenges, we see, still wondering what kind of sites should you be sampling to make sure you're covering your whole facility. Of course, how many samples and needs to fit in with, how much time and resources you have to spend on this program, recognizing it's probably only 10% of your whole food safety program. Again, creating something that's unique for each facility. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of solution or approach. And then, of course, you've been sampling and sampling, you haven't found Listeria or Salmonella. So how do we know that our program is designed well if we know that these are typically rare or have low prevalence in our environment? Are we looking in the right place and it's just not there, or could we be looking elsewhere? So I think combining all of these challenges and existing guidance and opinions out there sometimes leads to programs that may no longer make sense for your operation, right? You just keep adding on different requests and different ideas, and so sometimes it's good to just step back and reevaluate where you're at with your program and why you're testing and what information that's giving you. And so that's really what I want to focus on today. And to start out, I just want to get a quick poll of the audience and see how this works. Launch this poll. So hopefully you can see this pop up on your screen. But I just want to get an idea of where everyone is at with their environmental monitoring program, and maybe it'll help me to tailor some of this content to you, and then move forward with how to step back again and design and review and update your program. So I'll give you a few more seconds here. Perfect. I think all of those have come in. A few more seconds now if you haven't answered yet. Great, thanks. So yeah, it looks like we have quite a spread. Some still under development, some looking to review or updating their program, a few in place for a while and best in class. So I think what I have prepared is still relevant for everyone, and hopefully you can get some action points out of this. So to start off, I think when approaching either designing or reviewing or updating your program, again, stepping back and thinking about conducting a really rough risk assessment. And so kind of thrown up here, just a rough framework that you could use to evaluate, again, thinking through the potential for introduction, transmission, and persistence in your operation, whether it's Listeria or Salmonella. And so thinking about assessing, what products are you producing? Of course, whether there is a kill step or not, do you have, several different types of products that might have different risks? What are the incoming materials? Where are they coming from? How are they stored? And then, of course, your processing area, processing line, how that might relate to control or transmission throughout your environment. People, of course, are probably your most likely vectors for introduction or transmission. And so really understanding, their training, their routine, what they need to do to get their job done, and how that might relate to controls and verifying those controls. Of course, we know the age of your facility and the infrastructure of your facility is directly related to harborage of contamination, mainly how difficult it is to clean, whether it was designed to be a food manufacturing facility or not, whether you've inherited it from another company. Really think about what kind of risks you have just from the infrastructure, the layout, or the age of your facility. And then finally, historical data and prior knowledge. Sometimes you may not want to rely solely on historical data to assess the risk in your operation, especially if you've made a lot of changes to any of those previous, facility, people, process, or product, to the point where maybe historical data is no longer reflective of your current operation. But I really think that combining that with your prior knowledge and experience, you have a lot of information there to be able to understand where your risk areas are and what you're doing to control them. I think you all know your facilities and your products and your processes more than anybody else. And so really try to leverage that, again, bring together a team of food safety, quality operations, sanitation, maintenance, and really try to walk through past experiences that you've had, and what you have put in place to control those or to address those. And that will really dictate how you can use environmental monitoring to verify or validate those controls. Then, the next phase I see is before writing out, your program, your written SOP, and implementing training and things like that. You really need to get out into the facility, particularly at different times of day, during production, beginning, and during cleaning and sanitation. You really need to get to know the uncleanable areas, how things are disassembled and cleaned or not, how accessible they are during cleaning, if they're moved out of the room during cleaning, how traffic and water levels change during production, condensation, again, how employee behavior changes over the shift. I think those are all going to really give you information to better design, where you're verifying certain controls. And I think along with that, we have to mention, thinking through actually how the samples are being collected, because these are the data points that you're relying on to make decisions. If you have poorly collected data that may not be reflective of the true situation at that site at that time, it may lead to poor decision making or less than ideal decision making. So of course we can think about the typical details of taking a sample. When do you sample, where do you sample, who's doing it, what kind of sponge or apparatus is being used, what kind of pressure is applied, how large of an area do you take, do you do intensive or special sampling events? But I think the metric that I like to talk about at this step is are your knees dirty afterwards? So I have a picture here of one of our team members sampling a drain. Do you really get down, try to sample the site, try to think about where contamination might be, in that piece of equipment or in that drain and get down there and sample it? Or do you just look at eye level, you know, and take a swab to take a swab? Are the people taking the samples empowered to really get in, get dirty, and find contamination? And then of course you really need to outline your corrective actions. You need to think through what you will do if you get a positive. If you're truly trying to find the contamination, then outlining the corrective actions that need to occur when you find it is critical before actually implementing the program.
Yeah, and Claire, I just wanted to ask on that last slide. So in terms of getting your knees dirty, right? I mean, that not only does that have to do with, you know, the actual location of the sampling site, but that's also the way the sample's taken, right? And the actual physical way that sponge is applied to that area, correct?
Exactly, yeah. Applying pressure, you know, of course, using the sponge completely to get into that site. Yeah, but really trying to get down and get into the site, sample it appropriately is exactly what I mean, yeah.
Great, thanks.
And like kind of just a visual metric you can think of is, you know, were your knees dirty afterwards? So, you know, I go in and I do a swabathon and I'm, you know, on the ground, I got to change my coat or my knees get dirty. And I think just maybe gets you thinking on what kind of effort you put towards your sampling program.
Right, now I've seen you do it.
So then I think it's an important point to make that sampling alone does not control contamination, right? So I think that's why I emphasize that how you take that sample is important, because you're using that data to make, you know, take action. And so really it's what's done afterwards that's going to reduce the risk of harborage and cross-contamination. So this phase or this step is really about using those results to drive change. It starts with collecting, you know, enough information with that sample to be able to understand what possibly was happening if there was something present at that time. So, for example, you know, maybe you use software to collect, you know, time and date stamp that sample. Maybe you mark on a map where that sample was taken and understand the proximity of that sample to an open doorway or a traffic path or a drain. You know, maybe you add the line number to that sample. Of course, you want to know what zone it was. The more information you can add to that particular sample, the better informed you'll be when you're thinking through, you know, what potentially was a source of contamination there and what you should do subsequently. And then, of course, how you review the results to take action. You know, setting up some sort of frequency to actually look into the results instead of, you know, checking off that it was done, signing off on the results and filing it away, but really, again, using that as prior knowledge and historical information to further refine your program. Pulling together a team of people, generating specific reports. Maybe you need to send those reports to higher ups and justify the time and resources being spent on your program, and making a case for the importance of environmental sampling to the business and you know, to the company's risk. And ultimately, you know, the hope is that this drives immediate action if needed, but then is part of kind of a long-term vision for improving, you know, your process, people, or the operation, whether that's capital improvements, whether that's training, etc. So really using the results, visualizing them, discussing them, and then making changes in the short and long term. And then finally, I think once you've built up some experience with the program, it's in place, it's being reviewed, and you can find time and think about getting your head above the water, you know, really you can start to incorporate new science and risk-based improvements. So trying to set an individual or find some time to stay current on new science, new guidance and technology. I think there's a lot of good, of course, conferences, webinars like these, industry groups that really push out good information. Of course, you still need to evaluate those internally for your operation, particularly around new rapid detection methods, new sampling approaches. Again, evaluate those for your food matrix, for your conditions in your environment, your equipment, your risk, tolerance. That gets to my next point of, I think as an industry, as we start getting more rapid detection methods, and when we think about whole genome sequencing and the amount of information that's being collected in our environments, we're going to really start having to define our risk tolerances and accept that they may be dynamic. What I mean by that is, we often know that there's no zero risk in food manufacturing. Obviously, we're always trying to reduce risks of contamination, but that's going to be a balance between costs and resources and just practicality. But we often don't quantify that and accept that it might change in the course of the year as programs evolve and as all of those items that we've mentioned previously, your products, your processes, your facility evolve. So I really think this will be important moving forward, especially in environmental monitoring, to understand what our risk tolerances are. We're trying to find contamination. And so what we need to be open to learning and adapting to those changing risks in the environment. And then finally, defining metrics to measure the efficacy of our environmental monitoring program. I very much so have the perspective that more samples is not always better. And I think we often lose sight of that. We just think, well, to be aggressive means to take a lot of samples. And I don't think that's necessarily, the most risk-based approach. But we really do need to collect all that data, build out metrics, and think about how your program is reducing risks related to product contamination. So yeah, I think every once in a while, staying current and thinking about again, new science and risk-based improvements is really important to just keep your program in check instead of making it just this bulky, huge program over the years. So I think I'll stop here now and have everybody do another poll just to see if any of these previous phases would be useful, especially if you're answering previously that you your program is under review or you're thinking about updating it, to see which of the phases I just went through might be most beneficial today for your business as you think about designing and maintaining it. This will help us to prepare further webinars, going deeper into any of these topics. I'll give you guys another minute or so.
Right, so Claire, so essentially, and I'm just paraphrasing your much more knowledgeable walkthrough of these, but just going down the list of answers, right? It's, hey, I've got to, really understand my facility better. I feel like I could improve there. Going down to answer B, say, hey, I just got to get down and dig in, and keep moving down the list, right? Hey, we've got all the data. We just got to use it to, further along and evolve our environmental monitoring plan. And then kind of, if we're doing the crawl, walk, run, right? The number D is or letter D is the sprint, right? That's, hey, we have not only taking all the data that we've collected, but we're adding science and really some more advanced methods to our approach in order to make it, the most advanced that it could be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm seeing, people coming through, making science and risk-based updates seems to be most beneficial at this point. So this is great. I think I'll end there. A few more seconds if you haven't answered yet. Okay, I'll close that. Great. So yeah, I think this signals to us that maybe we need another webinar in that area. So finally, I just would like to introduce some of the services and software that iFood Decision Sciences offers around environmental monitoring. Kind of touch on some of those topics I just went through. So here at a high level, depending on what your interests are or needs are, we offer help with reviewing your SOP, that written program, and providing feedback or recommendations, or if you're starting from scratch, again, giving inputs on what should be included and what might be considered, best practices. Maybe it's coming in and training, your employees. If you answered getting your knees dirty, maybe that's what's needed, just coming on site and showing how I take a swab, or how much effort should be put into actually taking a really good sample. We also offer kind of mock swabathon program, just coming in and taking 2 to 3 times the number of samples as your routine program to, again, do that check and see if, we sample places that you have never sampled before, if we can find areas of contamination that, maybe you weren't thinking about because you see your facility every day. And then finally, software tools and predictive models to really help with collecting all the data along with it, your program, reviewing the program, and maybe getting towards more risk-based approach. So just digging a little bit deeper into the actual software, similar to food safety software for other applications besides environmental monitoring. You can collect the sample data in real time as you're doing the swabbing. We can link that to a calendar so that you have that on your schedule. It can be alerting the person who needs to do it, also alerting the manager who needs to review and sign off on the program. You can also give really narrow access to auditors or customers who may want to see the program or results. Of course, there's a dashboard that updates in real time as well to give you vision into your program, whether it's charts or tables or mapping. And then finally, we have this enable simulation model, which I'll show you in a few slides. But really, it's a decision support tool based on simulations of production in your environment and predictions of hotspots and contamination pathways, basically in a computer version of your facility. Just have a couple of slides showing you what a dashboard could look like. We can look at your overall swabbing data by time, a rolling window over the past couple of weeks or the past month or the past year. You can look at it by zone, food contact, non-food contact surfaces. You can look at it by particular sites. You can look at it by month, over time, as you see in that line chart. Here's an example. If you have a facility map with your sites located on there, you hover over one of those sites and you can see a bit deeper, what the information on that particular site is, what's that machine, what's the zone category, when was it last sampled, was Listeria there or not, really any kind of information you want to include there. And this is just a really good visualization of, how your coverage in the facility looks, but also, again, if you are having contamination, you can visualize on your process flow or with traffic, potential pathways or routes of introduction or transmission. And then lastly, just a quick slide on the simulation model. So ENABLE stands for environmental monitoring with an agent-based model of Listeria. So right now, this is very focused on Listeria. As opposed to Salmonella. But as I mentioned, it's a customized model of your facility, and we simulate production basically at a square foot level, very high resolution of what's going on in each square foot of your processing room. looking at if Listeria is introduced, where does it go? How long does it stay there? Where else might it travel to? And really just generates a lot of data that we can then, look at in terms of, again, most likely spots to have contamination, and therefore, where should you prioritize your sampling plan? Conduct a root cause analysis would be, okay, you have a positive here. What does the model show as potential sites that around it that might also be contaminated? Maybe you use it to update GMPs that were leading to contamination and many other use cases. So this is pretty new and novel tool that we're very excited about. So finally, I will just end with one more poll to gauge, again, where we're at as an industry in this transition to, or kind of utilization of software tools for environmental monitoring in general. I'll give you a minute to answer, whether you're using any software tools to track your environmental monitoring program and its efficacy. So no being mainly still done on paper. Yes, and maybe you're just using Excel for creating some charts and reports, managing your master site list. Maybe you're using a mapping software, whether it's something you developed in-house or something you paid for. And then D, you're using mapping and analytics software. So I'll give you a few more seconds to.
Right, and Claire, so I just wanted to kind of re-emphasize, so all of the last handful of slides that you went over, all of that is just for everyone's knowledge on the call. Everything that we have in terms of obviously software, but then the swabathon and the review of your program, right? That's specific not just to each client that we partner with, but even within those clients, right? That's specific for each facility, right? That's not kind of a blanket approach where we say, okay, you're a mixed greens processor, we'll apply this. Okay, you're processing apples, right? We'll apply this. It's specific to your individual operation and individual setup of that operation within each of your facilities.
Right, good point. Yeah, good point of clarification. Okay, well, thanks everyone for answering. Seems like Excel is still a very popular mode for the environmental monitoring program and managing the sites and the results. So that's helpful to know. And really just I'll end again with a summary of those 4 phases. Again, taking a step back and looking at your program, I think most of you will have a lot of operational and organizational knowledge within your teams to pull back and look at your program, and then think about, how you're where is your data coming from? How are those samples being collected? Are you putting sufficient effort and emphasis on the techniques of swabbing your environment? Are your knees getting dirty? And then are you using those results to make changes? How often and how do you look at your environmental monitoring data to take action and make changes? And then finally, how do you stay up to date with any new science and risks of your unique operation to incorporate those into your program? So with that, I think we have a few more minutes. I'll take any questions. You can type them into the Q&A box in the Zoom webinar, and I'll let you read through those and let me know if we've got any questions.
Great. Yeah, we've got a few really good questions. So thanks everyone, for submitting those. First, I think this kind of goes hand in hand with what we just talked about a couple slides ago. So the question is, in the environmental monitoring planning module in iFood, is there a distinction between risks in processing plants versus packing houses? So I can take that one, right? So that, Yes, absolutely. So even, whether it's a processing plant or a packing house, right, we're customizing and making those distinctions, as the question said, for each specific facility, right? So not only is it important and paramount for us to understand your operation, but as Claire said, kind of, right, that we go in there and get our knees dirty, right? We're going to be on site evaluating what's happening in that facility because, that's the only way to really do it in a scientific way, right, Claire?
Certainly, yeah. And of course, as I mentioned, if you're just packing, there's no water in your environment, you might have less emphasis on, sampling in, wet areas compared to a processing facility that's almost always wet. So definitely that makes a difference in how you will develop your program, but then also how you implement our software module.
Great. And then there's another question. So this is actually a really good one. I think that you could take, Claire. So it says, if you don't get positives, how do you know if you are doing a great job or you're just not looking hard enough?
Yeah, so I think that's really where you have to challenge yourself and your program, whether you bring in external people or maybe some corporate people who aren't involved in your routine program to look at where and how you're swabbing. So with with a mock swabathon, we often think about comparing an external expert with your routine program. So if somebody who doesn't know your facility as well as you do comes in and identifies Listeria or identifies contamination more at a higher level, then maybe that suggests you're not sampling in the right locations. But if you have a higher routine prevalence than someone who's just coming in, then that means you've designed your program to to find and look for Listeria. So I think we really need to pull in, whether it's people within your company or external people, but that really helps just to review again where you're sampling and how you're taking those samples.
Great. So last question we have here, I think we just got another one in, so second to last question. So this one is mentioning if we are lacking customer specifications for guidance, do we have any kind of recommendation for ranges for environmental coliform or E. coli CFU per gram or TPC CFU per gram to set for sampling?
I'm sorry, Jim, could you repeat that?
Yeah, no problem. So it's saying if we're lacking customer specifications for guidance, do we have any correct ranges for environmental coliform or E. coli CFU per gram or TPC CFU per gram set for sampling?
So yeah, those would be indicators, not necessarily linked to the presence of pathogens. If you're using other indicators to verify cleaning and sanitation, you would typically set levels for aerobic plate count, for example, of what you define as a clean surface. And there are set quantities that, several industry guidance groups have come out with. But if you're trying to set thresholds for determining a clean versus a dirty surface, typically it's recommended that you sample before cleaning, which would be, a dirty surface, and then sample after your routine cleaning and see the reduction you get, and then do an even deeper cleaning and see the reduction or see the level of aerobic plate count or coliform, whatever indicator you're using is present. And so that's typically how you would set a threshold. But again, that's not going to link necessarily to the presence of pathogens. That's really just telling you whether that surface is clean and sanitized.
Right.
I hope that answers that question.
Okay. So last question here. This person's asking, so they have a wet and a warm processing area, then a dry and cold packaging area. They're currently focusing on swabbing for Listeria and processing and Salmonella and packaging. Would you recommend that they swab and look for both pathogens in both areas?
So yeah, I think that's typically what we're starting to see, especially, buyer customer requirements are asking for Salmonella in at least warehouses. Some rough rule of thumb, if you are interested in sampling for both in processing, definitely Listeria more likely to be in the processing environment. But if there are some dry areas, maybe you could think about dividing your samples by 80-20, 80% Listeria in processing and 20% Salmonella in processing in that wet. And then in the dry storage areas, maybe reverse that. So 80% Salmonella and 20% Listeria. But again, I think that's where, if you have no information about, risks in either of those, you might build up 3 months or so of historical data and then make adjustments to whatever makes sense. But yeah, typically, again, we think of Salmonella in dry, warmer environments, that Salmonella, Listeria in your cool, wet environments.
Awesome. So another question. Thanks again, everyone, for submitting them. So this one's asking, do you recommend sampling for Listeria species or Listeria mono?
So very good question. Definitely Listeria species. So as a first level of analysis of your sample, we're looking for presence of conditions that would support Listeria monocytogenes if it were there. So I didn't mention, but there are 17 species of Listeria, the genus of bacteria, and Listeria monocytogenes is the only human pathogen, that will make us sick. But as a more conservative or kind of early warning sign, we typically just look for Listeria species as a way to capture the presence of any Listeria, whether it's monocytogenes or not. We don't want that in our operation. And so, first analysis should be Listeria species. Some companies decide to further speciate if you are having kind of routine positives, if you're, challenged with understanding whether you have a persistent contamination or whether it's, being reintroduced. You could think about carrying out the analysis a bit further to ask the lab to give you which species is actually there. So if you have the same species, over time, that could suggest that, you've got a source of contamination that you haven't eliminated. But if it was different species every week or every month, that might suggest that you have some kind of, transient introduction route. I think we will see, some further typing. It can be done if you want to get more specific than species, if you want to know if it was actually the same strain. There are some more advanced analytical methods that could be used and that are available. But in general, just looking for Listeria species and treating all of them, any positive as if it were Listeria monocytogenes is the best practice.
Great. Well, I think that does it for today. Claire, really appreciate you walking everybody through this. This was very, very informative and educational. If you guys have any, questions or want to bounce any ideas off Claire or, explore, any discussion further, you've got her contact info there on her screen. But yeah, thanks a lot, Claire. Great job.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.